This is the Flowering of the Middle Ages, History 4330, Week 14, and this is the final week of our class. So we'll be winding up everything tonight, I hope, in some very important ways. As you all know, your third paper is due tonight, so those of you here in the studio have already turned yours in. Those of you viewing this program on KUHT should be mailing in or emailing in your papers today. So let me give you a little information on the final exam. The final exam will be 10 short essay questions, and I've emailed all of you the date and time and place of the final exam. We will have 10 short essay questions, and we'll print them up on paper and give them to you, and you'll write your answer right on the exam, so you won't need to bring a blue book. One of the questions will be on tonight's lecture. Bring pens, blue or black ink, and the exam should take you about an hour, although we're allowing 2 hours. We also want to do an evaluation of the class because we want your comments on the class, and I think that will take about half an hour. We also hope to return your third papers at the final exam. We're going to try very hard to have them all graded and give them back to you, so by then you should have a good idea of what your grade is. Last week, we heard Robert Palmer talk about law, state, and society, and it was interesting when I was going back over my notes on the philosophy lecture. I found that Cynthia Freeland had posed a question in the philosophy lecture, does God want a king? And so how do you think medieval people would answer that? The royal faction and the barons would probably say, well, of course God wants a king, and the popes and the bishops might have a different answer. But God wants order and system and mathematical precision in the universe. God is orderly, and he wants order. And this is a prime principle of the medieval Renaissance. And the medieval state fulfilled this goal as Palmer described it to you. On the other hand, there's a famous figure that Cynthia Freeland didn't mention, who's one of my favorites, Siger of Brabant, who preached the twofold truth. And what Siger did was to resolve the problem of Aristotle by saying Aristotle and the Bible are both equally valid. That if they contradict each other, that's the way it is. That's a twofold truth. Both things are true at the same time, even when they contradict each other. This picture is kind of nice because it symbolizes church and state and the ideas of church and state, the statue of St. Peter next to the statue of Constantine. Church and state can be regarded in very much the same way as Siger of Brabant looks at them, the twofold truth. And like so many other medieval people, medieval philosophers forced human reason beyond its actual capacity. And this is one thing we see about the medieval Renaissance, is people pushed the envelope. They went as far as they could. Palmer described the medieval state as an exercise in human reason. Before 1066, Anglo-Saxon kingship was in a primitive state. We had a kind of divine kingship side by side with Germanic egalitarianism and election of kings. And this is kind of a contradiction. Ethelbert's laws were very arbitrary, and they were sort of open to negotiation. The counties or shires and hundreds and the Danegeld, a national kind of income tax, was an Anglo-Saxon institution. And here we can see Anglo-Saxon England as it was at the time of the Norman conquest. And here are the Normans conquering England, again, the Battle of Hastings. When the Normans conquered England, we have another configuration. All of England is unified and united with Normandy, as we see here. In 1066, William the Conqueror introduced feudalism, and what he created was feudal monarchy, which combined centralized government with feudal institutions. He sort of superimposed the lord-vassal courts on the county courts. He introduced the justiciar, who was a kind of viceroy, and he introduced the exchequer, a central treasury. One thing that Palmer didn't mention was a council of barons who were bound to advise the king, as the king was bound to listen to their advice. The council of barons included the magnates and the bishops, and William the Marshal was one example. And ultimately, Parliament grew out of that council of barons. After 1076, Palmer argued that there was a true medieval state, and the key was the standardization of writs. Again, reason, system, and order were applied to the state and replaced the personal relationships of feudal monarchy. The common law was applied to all, and here is the Council of Barons that I was just mentioning, presided over by the king. And here are the dominions of the Plantagenets, who, under Henry II, really created the medieval state. Philip Augustus also began to unify France, and the unifying principle was different in France, the sanctity of the king. And this is symbolized by Louis IX, or Saint Louis, who was the epitome of kingship, a king who was sainted, who was actually a saint in his own right. France was also unified by feudal principles, principles such as escheat to the lord, or wardship of the heir, or marriage of the heiresses. England was quite different, and England fell under the rigid rules of law. Standardization and bureaucratic mentality, sort of ordered by right reason, gave rise to a justice that meant following the rules. And in Magna Carta, the rules were also applied to the king, who had to be under the law after 1215. So England preaches loyalty to the state as well as loyalty to the king, as in France. And here's a sort of different view of the dominions of the Plantagenets. One feature of them is that each one was ruled by its own set of laws. Even though Henry II ruled two-thirds of France, and he also ruled Ireland and Wales, each state within his complex of states was ruled under its own set of laws. And sometimes we forget that about Henry II. Whereas here are the dominions of Henry II as they would be seen. I have these two backwards, but these are as they would be seen as the lands ruled by them. And here is France, which is very much ununified, and it unifies a lot later than England. Here is St. Louis, Louis IX, and here is Saint Denis, the abbey which crowned all the kings of France and gave them holiness. The Black Death changed everything in England. Society, and in Europe, in fact, society was turned upside down, and 40% of the population was killed. The upper classes were united to coerce the lower classes and each other, as Palmer argued, and government became aggressive and controlling. The statutes of laborers, treason, and provisors were the compelling statutes that ordered society, and Palmer argued that then, after the Black Death, there existed a government of inherent authority where the state was fully empowered to control society. This week we're going to talk about before and after the Black Death, Dante and Chaucer. Dante was the father of the Italian language. He wrote the Divina Commedia, and Beatrice, or Beatrice, was his heroine. He wrote just before the Black Death in 1347. The Black Death meant a total change in mortality. Chaucer wrote just after the Black Death. And here is Dante, here is Italy, and here is Florence, where he lived. And now we're going to turn to the lecture by Luisetta Schommel from the Department of Modern and Classical Languages on Dante Alighieri.
Is the copy of the fresco done by Giotto during probably 1290 and 300. Is a youthful Dante presented here, and we are not very familiar with him. But perhaps this Dante will be more familiar to you. It's not a great portrait. It's just a drawing done by Gustave Doré, a French artist of the last century, and one of the most famous illustrators of the Divina Commedia. But that is not very important, because I think that Dante is a living idea. It's not even a man anymore. His portrait has been stylized, his features has been stylized by painters, iconized, and by now it's just someone very familiar to us just by looking at him. I wonder how many of you would have recognized his features outside this specific context. Anyone? No one? No familiar with Dante? You have to go for 15 days in Italy, and you will see so many portraits, statues by Dante, that after a couple of weeks, you will think that you have always known him. He's the father of the Italian language, and is perhaps the moral guide of Italian. Is truly a very, very important man. But let's look at this feature now. Let's look at Dante's feature. He has an austere figure, aquiline nose, prominent chin, hollow cheeks, and very penetrating eyes. It's a face marked by the experiences of life, and very hard experiences of life. To understand a little bit about the Divina Commedia also, I think it's important to be able to, not perhaps to know Dante's life, we don't know enough of that, but perhaps to be able to imagine him, to imagine this type of man. And I say that because truly we cannot avoid Dante while reading the Divina Commedia. His presence is overwhelming. We all know that Dante is the author of the poem, but that Dante is also the narrator, is the protagonist of the narration, is the poet who is addressing us, the reader. He is the pilgrim, is every man who is taking the journey into afterlife, but is also the individual Dante, the one, the chosen one by divine providence to bring a message to humanity. So we see that we have so many Dantes, and some more. Dante is the man who loved Beatrice, but Dante is also the Florentine exile with his load of resentments, of love and hate for his city, for Florence. If you think of Dante, we recognize right away two main factors in his life. His inner life is dominated by Beatrice. Dante tells the story of his love for Beatrice in a book, in a juvenile book called the Vita Nuova. Beatrice stories is told in a very light manner with sonnets, canzoni, and some prose, and it's very, very vague, the relationship between Dante and Beatrice. Perhaps she didn't even know that he loved her so much. But in any case, Dante tells us that he met Beatrice for the first time when he was 9, and he met her again some 9 years later. And she appeared to him as a miracle of kindness, of gentleness and virtue. After her death, early death, in 1290, Dante became persuaded that Beatrice was the guide of his thoughts and his emotions toward ideal perfection, this type of goal that every noble mind wants to reach. Another aspect of Dante's life, which is very important, as you see here, Beatrice has been identified. It was Bice Portinari. He became the wife of Simone dei Bardi, and she died in 1290. The second part is talking of Dante, White Guelph, Boniface VIII, Pope, and the Monarchia. Before we take a close look to Dante in this in this other aspect of her life, it's perhaps good to take a look at the politics in Italy during the 13th century. 13th century Italy was torn by the struggle for power between Guelphs and Ghibellines. The Guelph party was the pro-papal party, and the Ghibelline the pro-imperial party. So you see that the two powers are the emperor and the pope, fighting for supremacy in Italy and fighting not for the conquest of one city, but for universal power. This fight occupied practically the 13th century in Italy, and all Italy participated in these fights and war. It was the Ghibelline were superior at that time, other time the Guelphs. What is important for us is that the Ghibelline party prevailed, at least the Guelph party, prevailed in Florence in about 1266, after the Battle of Benevento, where Manfred, the great Emperor Frederick II's son, was killed and defeated. At that time, in Florence, came into power the Guelph party. And Dante belonged to the Guelph party, his family at least, because we are in 1266, and Dante was born in 1265. But in any case, toward the end of the century, the Guelph party in Florence split into two factions, the white and the black. The white faction was against papal intervention and interferences. The blacks were more ready to compromise with the Pope. And that was the situation in which Dante found himself. Here we have some brief reconstruction of Dante's life. His birth in Florence in 1265. In 1295, he became involved into the political life of Florence, and in 1300, he was elected to one of the most important offices in Florence. He was one of the 6 priors. The priors was the name given to the Councilor of State in Florence. His life, this political life, came to an abrupt end in 1301. At that time, the forces, the supporters of the Pope, were able to overthrow the whites and came into power. It was the end of Dante's political involvement and the beginning of his life of exile. He was exiled in 1302. All his goods were confiscated, and he was condemned to death if ever would fall in the hands of the officer of the Florentine officers. The exile was very hard for him. He kept wandering from one place to another, to the court, to one prince, from one prince to another, as a counselor, as an advisor, as a secretary, and the exile marked him very deeply, and he became very bitter about what the Florentines did to him, because he felt that it was truly an unjust type of life he was condemned to live. In 1310, from 1310 and 1313, Dante had a period of really great hopes, because the new elected emperor, Henry VII, came down to Italy with a large army and attempted to restore the imperial party in Italy all over. Dante welcomed the emperor with great enthusiasm. He wrote at that time 3 very important letters to the princes of Italy, to the Florentine citizens, and one to the emperor himself. But all his hopes were just shattered in 1313 with the very early death of Henry VII. From 1313 to 1321, Dante devoted himself only to his ethical and poetic mission, which is the writing of the Divine Comedy. Probably he started the writing of the Divine Comedy, the Inferno and Purgatorio, earlier. The dates are always very, very uncertain. We don't know very much, but probably by 1307 he began to write the Divine Comedy. And the last part, the Paradiso, was circulated after his death in 1321. He never came back to Florence. So the name of those 2 cities, Florence and Ravenna, are quite significant in Dante's life. They mark his exile and his suffering. I don't know if this map of Italy will give you some idea. Okay. Of course, it's a map of today's Italy, or I don't know which date. It's not the divisions that we could have during Dante's time. But in any case, we are able perhaps to identify here Florence right here and Ravenna right there. During his exile, Dante kept on wandering in this part of Italy, going to Verona, Lunigiana. We don't know, we cannot follow really well all his traveling, but we know for sure that he died in Ravenna at the court of one very kind prince, Guido Novello da Polenta. Do you have any notion of the Divine Comedy? Did you read anything about the Divine Comedy? Just a little bit. Perhaps do you remember Francesca da Rimini? Well, Guido Novello da Polenta was the nephew of the famous Francesca that Dante talks about in Canto Quinto of Inferno. It's a beautiful story. And he died in Ravenna, and this last protector, if we want, benefactor, was kinder, we can imagine, than other he met before. We, talking again of this particular period of Dante's life, 1310, 1313, as I told you, mark a moment of very great enthusiasm and hope for Dante. He really thought that perhaps his exile would end, because the descent of the emperor would bring about, according to his hopes, a drastic a drastic change on the politics of Italy, and according to these changes, his exile would have ended. It was, however, during that time that Dante wrote Monarchia. Monarchia, let me see if I have it here, right here, Monarchia, perhaps in 1312. And this book, Monarchia, is very important because in those pages Dante expounds his political theory. And this political theory at this point became quite drastic, and it was coming closer and closer to a kind of Ghibelline, pro-emperor type of ideology. If we want to appreciate really what Dante's political and religious, or just not even religious, but both of them, anyway, concerning the church and the emperor, this is the type of ideology Dante had. He thought that both Pope and Emperor were taking their authority from God himself, and they were not subordinate one to another. So he was establishing, Dante, this way, a very clear separation of power. This theory is simplified here, but it thinks also that man, being part mortal and part immortal, has before him two sets of blessedness. One is temporal and one is spiritual. And the Pope should lead the humanity toward eternal blessedness, while the Emperor should lead humanity to temporal blessedness. So we can see now, we can appreciate the fact that Dante is not so much of a mystic. He's not a mystic at all. Earthly life is very important for Dante. And man has the right to achieve happiness during the life, and how? Through the good use of reason and under the leadership of the emperor. This idea of the emperor and the empire, practically Dante had an idea of a world central government. For centuries, it appeared like a unbelievable utopia. But somehow during our time, it's not so utopic perhaps to hope for a world central government. And that is what Dante was expecting from the triumph of the emperor. After this very brief presentation of Dante, and I will leave it to the handouts to integrate what I said now, we can discuss a little bit of the structure of the Divine Comedy and of the Divine Comedy itself. That is the translation of the Divine Comedy by Longfellow, an American author of the last century, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Oh, quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura esta selva selvaggia ed aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura. Tante amara che poco più è morte. Ma per ridire del ben che io vi trovai, dirò delle altre cose che io vi ho scorte. Do you recognize those verses? No one? Never heard of it. That is the beginning of the Divina Commedia. And Dante is lost in the dark forest of sin and is rescued by the intervention of Beatrice, who sent him Virgil to help him and to be his guide through two of the kingdoms, through hell and through Purgatorio. Beatrice herself will be the guide, Dante's guide in Paradiso. So I don't think that you also you don't know, of course, what was the metrical device used by Dante throughout the Divina Commedia. In English, it's impossible to reproduce because English has too many consonants and Italian has so many vowels. So we cannot reproduce this metrical device, which is tercets, meaning lines of endecasyllables, 3 lines of endecasyllables, verses of 11 syllables, which are tied together by a chain-linked rhyme, which is called terza rima. If you look here in Italian, it's very easy to understand. You see, nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, we have a rhyme E. Mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, rhyme B, but smarrita, we are back, vita smarrita. Look one other line, and you find oscura, dura, paura. And we find forte, morte, scorte. So this chain-linked rhyme runs through the Divine Comedy and accounts so much for the wonderful rhythm of Dante's verses. They are verses which are very, very easy to remember, to recognize, to memorize, I would say. With this first notion, we establish the one symmetry already, and all the verses are endecasyllables with a rhyme that rhymes 3 times, the terza rima, and these 3 numbers is going to be really at the basis of the structure of the Divine Comedy. The number 3 will be repeated over and over throughout the comedy. The poem is divided in 3 canticles. Each canticles of the Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, is divided in 33 cantos, plus 1 canto of introduction in the Inferno. So 3 by 33 is 99, plus 1 of introduction, it makes 100 cantos. The 3 parts of the Divine Comedy are composed though of 33 cantos. Each cantos is composed by endecasyllable, tied together, tercets in terza rima, and the 1 canto of the beginning makes for the number 100 of the entire poem. And now I would present to you What do you think it is? Hmm? Is the 9 planets, and this is this cosmology by whom? Do you remember the name? Ptolemy, an astrologer of the 2nd century after that from Alexandria. That is the Ptolemaic type of cosmology, and Dante, of course, is adopting exactly the same type of cosmology which was common during his time. It was not perhaps among the common people, but certainly among the erudite and the people that belong to the intellectual class of Dante. At the center, what do we have here? What there is at the center? Can you imagine what it is? That is Earth. That is Earth at the center with 9 heavens, spheres, turning, revolving around the Earth. The Earth is at the center. The 9 spheres are revolving around the Earth. And outside here, encircling the 9 heavens, there is the Empyrean. In the Empyrean is the 10, if we want, the heaven, and is practically the same unmoved mover of Aristoteles. Did you study a little bit Aristotle? His conception, Aristotle conception, includes a first cause, an unmoved mover who gives the movement to all the spheres. That is the Empyrean, according to Dante, which is surrounding the 9 spheres, and is in the Empyrean that God dwells. And God is the prime cause who gives movement to the entire universe. And here we have, let me see it like that, because we had it this way before. That is Earth, divided in 2 hemispheres. The northern hemisphere is this one here. Here we have the southern hemisphere, which is covered by water, by the ocean. And from the water of the ocean emerges the mountain of Purgatory. Up and down our drawing, see that opposite to the Purgatory is the cavity of Inferno, which is very close, opens very close to Jerusalem. All this type of construction here, buildings, represent Jerusalem. And here we have the cavity of Inferno. Do you realize that it's practically the same mold that is imagined by Dante? The Purgatorio is the mold of Inferno, but it's upside down now. And in fact, it's the antithesis of Inferno, the Purgatory. Because in Inferno there is no hope. Well, hope is the driving force for the spirit who dwell in Purgatorio. We take a closer look now to Inferno. This one is a scheme of the Inferno, and here is interpreted by our artist Gustave Doré in more fantastic way and more perhaps attractive. But hell is not attractive at all. And let's see the divisions of hell. That is this big, large cavity, which opens here, and is divided in 9 large divisions, plus many other subdivisions, plus 1 more circle, 1 more, I would say, we call it circle, really, which is immediately after the door of the Inferno, in which there are the neutrals, the people who never took a stand in life, people who never committed themselves to anything. They are refused. Those people, the spirits, the souls there, are refused by heaven and they are refused by hell. No one wants them. And they drag their miserable existence for eternity as spirit, stung by insect, running after a banner without any color, because they didn't pick up any banner during their life. Now for eternity, they are damned to run after a banner without any color, without any meaning. Dante has the utmost despise for these people. He called them the one who never were alive. Never alive, because life is engagement, is passion, is commitment for Dante. So we have the Inferno, we said, is composed of 9 circles. But here we have this little division, this circle here, where are these neutrals. Then we start having here a large section. Then here in this other section are the heretics, here the violent, and here this entire part of hell is destined to the sin of fraud. Show you there how it works. The first part, this one here, here we have the neutrals. Then here we have incontinence. Then we have the heretics. Then the sin of violence. And right here, the sin of fraud. So the large division of the Inferno are incontinence, violence, and fraud. And they include other variety of sins, but those are the great division. Shall I push? What shall
Yes,
I
have a question. Did Dante think that hell was a 1- or 2-dimensional world? Why the absence for color?
Oh yes, oh yes. The Inferno, Paradiso, even Paradiso is made of matter, is concrete, is a kind of a cloud. It's matter for in which Dante enters. Dante enters into this cloud of matter when he's absorbed into Paradiso. He has a very concrete imagination, Dante. Shall I do anything here? No. Okay, put it back. I don't have anything else. I was talking of the heretics. Do you think that heretics were sinners? Were they sinners? According to, in which way? They refused faith. They were not responsible for any the sin of incontinence, violence, or fraud, but they refuse faith. And so they are punished in hell, but they don't belong to any one of these 3 great divisions. Everything in Inferno is controlled by the use of reason. What the sins of incontinence? What are the sins of incontinence? The sins which are committed because reason doesn't control our appetites. So to indulge to natural appetites beyond the limit of reason becomes a sin. Let's see violence. Violence, what is the relationship of violence and reason?
It overpowers reason.
Absolutely. And so it's the violent are condemned to hell. And fraud. What can be the relationship of fraud and reason? Do you see it? Reason and fraud.
Is it the use of reason to commit?
Very good. Excellent. And that is really the worst possible sin, is the degradation of the most noble, the noblest quality of human mind, reason, and to use it to sin. We are coming out of Inferno now, and we are with Dante in Purgatorio. We are just on the other side, at the Ante. In any case, there we are at the Purgatorio. The Purgatorio is a mountain, and again, the divisions of Purgatorio will be 9, plus one more space, which is at the top here, and is the earthly paradise. It comprises, though, of the Ante Purgatorio and 6 and 7 terraces, plus the earthly paradise. This section here, is called Ante Purgatorio, and includes two types of sins. Here they are the excommunicates and the late repentant. They are not yet in Purgatorio. They have to stay there years, centuries sometime, before they can climb the mountains to reach the top. Everything in Purgatorio is controlled by love. The controlling element in Inferno was reason. Here is love. And so we have two large sections before the Ante Purgatorio. Then we have perverted love and excessive love for earthly things. Those are the big divisions in the Purgatorio. When they reach the top of the mountain, the souls find themselves in earthly paradise, and from there, after the last purification, they can ascend to paradise. The theory of purgatory, do you know anything about this theory of purgatory? The Purgatorio theory. But it was a theory that was trying to make its way among all the other beliefs of the, let's say, the people during the 11th and 12th century. And by the 13th century, it found a quite numerous groups of followers that thought that between damnation and blessedness, there should be a place of repentance, and that is Purgatorio, in which is built, by the way, much of the Catholic doctrine.
Was the idea of limbo
The limbo,
present at this
of course, Virgil is in Limbo, and Limbo is in Inferno. It's the first circle of Inferno. What is the punishment of the soul in Limbo? They are not suffering of any physical pain, but they are torn by a great desire to see God, which is the ultimate goal of all human souls. But they know at the same time they will be forever deprived of the vision of God. And in Limbo, Dante meets many great and noble spirits. Homer, of course, Virgil, other Latin poets, some people belonging to the to other civilization, like Saladin and Avicenna, the great philosopher, and Averroes. They are all in the Limbo. And Virgil himself belongs to this place. We have to go back to look at to heaven, to this first one, and we see now that we see we are in Purgatory, on top of the mountain, and on the top of the mountain of Purgatory, Beatrice comes to meet Dante, and she gazes at the sun, and Dante gazes at the sun following Beatrice, and they both ascend to heaven. And they arrive in the first heavens, which is the heaven of moon. In Paradiso, what do we have? We have 9 heavens, which are revolving, and the Empyrean, which is unmoved. It doesn't move. And that is where God and all the souls, the blessed soul, resides. Dante meets, however, all these spirits in the different spheres of heavens. And that is by divine grace that they appear to Dante in a different sphere, not because they are obliged to be there, because they are in the Empyrean with God, but to make things easier for Dante to understand and to introduce themselves. There is not really a special place for this blessed soul, because they are all in the Empyrean. However, they are variation of blessedness and beatitude. That is because, according to Dante, each nature has a certain capacity to receive blessedness, and that's all the variation depends on that. This one are the most important symmetries, just formal, the division in canticles, cantos, and tercets, and the physics, really, the 3 canticles. I am supposed to do anything with this. Very good. I don't know. Just to remind some other evident symmetries in the Divina Commedia, for instance, each canticle begins with an invocation, exactly like in a poem, classical poem, like for instance, the Aeneid. And the first invocation is in Canto 2 of Inferno, and not the canto number 1, first canto, because this one, we said, is the introduction, and Dante describes a situation of being lost in the forest and receiving Virgil's help. But the canto secondo begins with an invocation to the muses, or muses of high genius. So is the capacity, the intellectual capacities of Dante that shall sustain him in this very hard matter. In Purgatorio is the holy muses again, and Calliope, one of the muses. In Paradiso, he asks for the support of Apollo. Apollo is the god of the muses. So there is a crescendo of, in this invocation, and we shall not forget also that each canticle ends with the word stars. E quindi uscimmo a rivedere le stelle, puro e disposto a salire alle stelle. Amore che muove il sole ed altre stelle. These words are at the end of each canticle and are the closing. The number 3, as we have seen, is the regulating principle of the moral structure and the architecture of the poem. And since Dante has a plastic imagination, his structure may be visualized, I think. It's a large cathedral in which 3 architectural orders are superimposed. Each order, although it presents the same structure, and we have seen the structure that are always alike, shows a dynamic progression from massive to very light. The structural principle remains the same, but its interpretation changes. The variety of the sculptures and ornamentation created by Dante's fantasies do not conceal the basic unity of the architectural design. The 3 orders are coherently unified by a subtle play of symmetries and correspondences that point to similarities between the 3 parts of the poem, while the variation, we will see now, indicate the progression from a lower to a higher level in a crescendo. The variation I would like to explore with you are the political theme, light and colors, movement, sound, and human figures. I would like to talk first of all of the political theme because it runs throughout the Divine Comedy in a very powerful manner as it's repeated over and over. And he manifests himself with prophecies of Dante's unjust exile, condemnation of corrupted officers of the church, invectives, visions, punishments, praises and rewards for good princes. I would like to give you a couple of examples concerning Dante's treatment of the political theme. First of all, Dante makes a large use of post-factum prophecies and anticipation, which are based on a narrative device. Dante's journey is supposed to have taken place in the year 1300. But of course, Dante wrote the poem years later. But the journey must have been taken place in 300. So that gives a large room to prophecies. For instance, the prophecy of Dante's own exile, which will be repeated over and over in a crescendo in Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradise. For instance, to give you an example of how Dante is using this device for the political theme, when he comes to paradise, he sees a seat which is waiting for the young emperor Henry VII, whom Dante loved very much, and the one who was just his last hope of going back to Florence. So he sits is waiting for him, that who will die only in 1313. But he has already a seat, and so he's saying that his emperor is a very good soul, and God is expecting him. But there is another amusing treatment of his arch enemy, the Pope Boniface VIII. Boniface VIII was the Pope who practically helped very much the blacks to come back to power in Florence. And they sent Charles de Valois with some excuses just to re-establish the blacks into power in Florence. And that was the cause of Dante's exile. So Boniface VIII is his arch enemy. That is how he is treating him. The journey has taken place in 1300, but Boniface died only in 1303. Thus, 3 years later, 3 years too late to be included among the worst sinners in hell. Here is Dante is coping with the situation, and that is the very humorous. It's a dark humor, because Dante is not a light and ironic type of writer, but it's very strong and muscular. Here we are in Inferno, and we are in the 8th circle, where the Simonists are set, as you see, head down into holes in the rock. You see them? You see the feet that are coming up? And their protruding feet are tormented by flames. Dante approaches one of the holes, and the sinner, who is head down in the hole, and who is the Pope, Nicholas III, thinks that a new damned soul is arriving. And according to the punishment, the newcomer will push this one down into the rock, taking his place. But since he is head down, he cannot see who is approaching. And so he says, Pope Nicholas III addresses Dante with these words: Dost thou stand there already? Dost thou stand there already, O Boniface? By many years the record lied to me. That gives at once an idea of Dante's hate for Boniface VIII, his passionate nature, and also a superb use of satire, because this representation is ludicrous. Just to see all these popes with the feet up is a tremendous despise for them. And by the way, the last words of Beatrice in Paradise, just before she will go back to her seat in the Empyrean, and Dante will be granted by divine grace the possibility to fix his eyes in God, in the vision of God. Her last words are of condemnation for Boniface VIII. So throughout the Divine Comedy, Dante's hate for Boniface VIII just survived and became, I would say, stronger and fiercer. However, the most important correspondence in the political theme and this crescendo may be fully understood when comparing canto sesto, always the same canto, in the three canticles. In Inferno, Ciacco makes a prophecy about Florence and indicates that envy, pride, and avariciousness are the causes of the city's disorder. In Purgatorio, a strong invective is pronounced by Dante against those who, opposing the imperial authority, are responsible for the condition of Italy, torn by opposing factions. In Paradiso, the Roman Emperor Justinian explains to Dante how the Roman Empire has been divinely appointed to prepare the world for the advent of Christianity, thus stating the legitimacy of imperial authority. The motif, the political motif, as you see, appear in the three canticles, in the same canticle, but with a crescendo. Florence, Italy, the empire. And that is those are the variations that Dante applies to really to create these feelings of going toward a higher sphere. Another motif that is very important to establish the variation is light and colors. The variation of light in the three kingdoms depend on one simple figure. God is the sun, is light, and is love. The shade of colors in each canticle, the shade of colors is set by the time of the day in which Dante begins his journey in each kingdom. Dante enters Inferno at night. He finds himself in the shores of Purgatorio at dawn and ascends to Paradiso at noon. Now, according to you, in Inferno there is light? No. Why there is no light? It's not enough. There is no God. There is not the grace of God. The only possible type of color, touches of color in Inferno, are given by the flames, like the flames here burning the Simonist popes. And then remember the dark forest, darkness is the symbol of sin, of lack of grace, loss of divine grace. In Purgatorio, that is a place of purification where the souls are sustained by God's forgiveness. What do you think that will be the color there and the light? He says that the quindi uscimmo, and then we finally we left hell to behold the stars again. If they are the stars, there should be the sun, isn't it? There should be an alternance. They alternate. The day and the night alternate in Purgatorio, like in earth. During the day, with the grace of God, the soul can climb the wall, the mountain of Purgatory. But during the night, there is not a grace of God, and so all movement comes to a stop in Purgatory. So it's very slow, the ascent to the top of the mountain. But there is light because they are sustained by the grace of God, these people. And now we are coming to paradise. What do you expect? What do you expect to see in paradise? No idea?
Rivers flowing out of the center.
Hmm?
Rivers flowing out of the center, tree of life, you know, all kind of sundry objects.
All kind of all kind of light in Paradiso, all kind of light. And why? I said that God is the light, is the sun, is love. So the presence of God is just shining in Paradiso, all over. There are no more colors in Paradiso, only rivers, configurations, constellation of lights that appear everywhere in different combination. Let me see. This one, for instance, can give you some idea. That is Doré's imagination, but those are just the lights that can appear there. Others here. Different configuration of lights only in Purgatorio, in Paradiso. Movement also is very important. And this is the premise to understand movement in Dante's world. Like the Aristotelian prime cause, God gives movement to his creation. The source of motion is determined by all unfulfilled desires. The motion, so the source of motion is unfulfilled desires. And in this universe, everything seeks its true place. And human soul seeks heaven, which is its true place. Let's see the consequences of this proposition. What is going to be, what type of movement can you imagine we can have in hell? Any idea?
No movement.
Very little. Circular movement only. Just concentric movement in the various circles. But the damned soul are obliged to come back always to the point from where they departed. And there cannot be any vertical movement. They cannot ascend, and they condemn to remain always in the same circle. And that is the reason why Inferno is so claustrophobic. You feel really oppressed in Inferno. I have been there with Dante many times, and I know the feeling. In any case, going down toward the bottom of Inferno, the movement decreases. And at the bottom itself, movement stops. And the traitors are immersed into the ice, and in this glacial surrounding, there is no more movement. Everything is paralyzed. And that is the movement in hell. In Purgatorio, which type of movement can we expect? Spiraling up, they circle around, they had to stop, but there is a spiraling type of movement toward the top of the mountains. And in Paradiso, all possible movements. In the Empyrean, there is no movement, but all the spirits can freely move from one heavens to another at the speed of light. That is extraordinary. I believe that I will say something about sound also. Sounds in the three kingdoms. Hell is cries, sighs, horrible words, invectives, chaos, sounds. In Purgatory, only choruses and sweet voices and prayers to God. And in paradise, of course, we have a triumph of songs and music, because the celestial spheres also produce music and notes. So we have a great change. But perhaps the greatest change is brought about by the human figures in the three kingdoms. In Inferno, we have a solo type of narration. And here we have a very romantic representation, of course. It's not typical of Dante, this one. That is typical of the fantasy of the 19th century. But what I would like to show you here is Paolo and Francesca. We have only two people. Look here in Purgatorio what type of we have. Here prevail a choral type of impression. We don't have this emphasis on the ego. In Inferno, we have a very strong emphasis on the ego. Here in Purgatorio, everything becomes choral, and the ego is kind of absorbed in the community. And that is the third vision of paradise. Here in paradise, we have they are still individual stories, but they are absorbed into universal one. They are talking of astrology, philosophical and theological problems, and the past has lost all its weight. It's kind of dedramatized. At the center here we have God, and the personal adventures is absorbed in universal issues. Past and future are contained in the eternal blessedness, and individual personality merge with the totality. So from the ego, strong egos of the Inferno, we come to a total immersion in the totality in Paradiso. I thank you very much. I think